Everyone hits a bump in the road. What do you do with it? Be inspired as we explore the ways people experience, navigate, and manage the ups and downs and twists and turns in this road trip called life. Welcome to another episode of Bump in the Road. The basic podcast is always free. We also have a premium subscription called Bump 2 that lets you listen in on extended behind-the-scenes conversations with our guests. Check it out at www.bumpintheroad.us. Simon Rinne's passion, aside from surfing, is men's mental health. He's had more than a few bumps in the road, including living with OCD, bouts of depression, and hiding his unhappiness behind a few beers. But today he is sober, aware, and inspiring other men to look within to find their authentic selves and have the courage to move forward into a better life. Please welcome Simon Rinne to Bump in the Road. Simon, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
Yeah, hello, Pat. Thanks so much for having me on Bump in the Road. I've had many bumps in my road over a long time. And I guess my story starts as a young boy, and I grew up in a place called Adelaide, South Australia. So for anyone who doesn't understand the accent, it is an Australian accent. It's in Central Australia. But to paint the picture, this is the 80s, 90s, noughties when I grew up and when I was a kid and a young adult. And I grew up in an area that was lower socioeconomic, lots of, I guess, unemployment, low incomes, maybe low to middle incomes, if you can call it that, single parent households, drugs, alcohol, gang violence, all this type of stuff in the northern suburbs of Adelaide, South Australia. And I say that because as a social worker, context is really important, and understanding the environments that we grow up in or we live in, how they can influence us along our journey. And so for me as a young boy, I was quite naive, and Mum used to say I was quite happy-go-lucky, and I would always be smiling, joking, jovial. But then something changed when I was 8 years old, and I developed this thing called obsessive-compulsive disorder, which I didn't know was a thing because in the 80s, 90s, noughties, we didn't talk about mental health conditions in the area that I grew up. It was not part of the vocabulary. But I didn't know I had this condition until I was 28 when I was diagnosed. And so from 8 to 28, I lived with undiagnosed mental health conditions, which also included depression and anxiety along the way. And then also my teens, I developed a liking for beer and for alcohol. And so for 20 odd years, I used alcohol as a way to numb essentially the excessive thoughts that would constantly ruminate in my mind. But I didn't have a way to talk about it because growing up in the 80s, 90s and noughties in the northern suburbs of Adelaide, mental health discussions weren't a thing. And so for me as a boy to show any sign of weakness would be someone, I would be labelled as someone who was soft or weak or a girl or gay. And so many young boys, and I remember even having conversations with some of my friends when they were emotional, and we would all just try to suck it up because that's what we've been taught to do. We've been taught to suck it up, move on, carry on. And this was at home, this was in the schoolyard, this was on the sports field. It was even in kind of like what we watched on TV as well. I remember growing up in that period, and my older brothers would put on the TV and they would dictate what movies we watched. So we would be watching things like The Terminator and Die Hard and Rambo and all these things that are hyper-masculine because hyper-masculinity is what we knew. To be a boy, to be a man was someone to be tough, to suck it up and to move on. And so I battled with this condition or these three conditions for 20 years before I finally, at the age of 28, found the courage and the encouragement from my now wife to go and speak to a GP and talk about this thing called mental health, which I still didn't understand what it was. And from there, that was in 2012, I believe. And so from there, finding a huge sense of relief to essentially talk about what's going on the inside. The diagnosis also gave me a little bit of power because I find that knowledge is power. So once I knew that I had these conditions, I could start to understand them a bit more, understand myself a bit more, and understand the social constructs of masculinity a bit more, because I could understand why boys and men are taught to suck it up and move on and carry on. But it wasn't really until 2020 that I started to shift that discourse of surviving mental illness or mental health conditions largely on my own, because I still didn't talk about it widely. And I burnt out. In 2020, I burnt out. So I was studying a master's degree in social work. I was working full-time in a high-pressure environment. We had 2 kids in that period of time as well, and plus my mental health conditions. And then COVID, all the lockdowns that were associated with that. So being at home and not being able to do my usual self-care activities, and I guess drinking more as well. And I burnt out. I hit an emotional and physical and spiritual, brick wall, and I was forced to spend 4 to 5 months trying to rediscover me, essentially. I had to take that time off of work. I was a couch potato, could barely function really on a day-to-day without emotional turmoil or headaches or anxiety, nausea, all sorts of stuff coming up for me. But this is where I found mindfulness and through my therapy, and I discovered this thing called mindfulness, which has become essentially the framework that I've taken into my social work career now since I've finished that degree, and really find a lot of safety and the courage to be authentic by being mindful and living a conscious life, as opposed to a life that for so long I lived almost on an autopilot. I would, get up every day, do the things that I needed to do, whether that was school, whether that was uni, whether that was work, whether that was fatherhood, all the things, but I would be doing it in a subconscious way. I wouldn't really be there feeling it and loving it and enjoying it for what it was. I was a lot of the time masking it with the alcohol, numbing everything, because I was so exhausted mentally, living with an OCD mind, which never stops thinking and never stops planning and never stops scheming. And mindfulness helped me to calm the mind. And then fast forward a couple more years, and turned 40 last year and decided to get sober. On my 40th birthday, I decided to put the beer down and really start to live this true, mindful, authentic self without alcohol. And I've since been sober and discovering that I probably never really needed the alcohol. What I needed was to actually go and speak to someone a lot sooner than I did. But I guess hindsight's a wonderful thing. It's 2024, which we're now recording in, and mental health is something that we talk about. And I think COVID allowed that for so many guys. It allowed guys and women and kids from all over the world to say, hey, I'm not doing so well, because people were all of a sudden asking how we're going and actually wanting us to be well. And so these days I'm living this more truer, authentic, mindful version of myself, which I now bring into my private practice called Mindful Men, supporting guys to essentially do the same. I created this therapy clinic for guys to almost be the guy that I never had growing up in those 80s, 90s and noughties, the northern suburbs of Adelaide. I grew up in a family, dad was there, my brothers were there, mum was there, but never felt comfortable enough to say, I do these weird things or I think these weird things and I need help with that. It was something that I shied away from because I was indoctrinated into that masculinity mindset that so many boys and men are, of suck it up, be a man, don't be soft, don't show emotions, because if you do that, then you're essentially weak, you're broken, you're not the kind of guy that this world needs, growing up in the 80s, 90s and noughties. So I brushed over 40 years of my life very quickly, but just wanted to give the highlight points, and happy to, certainly unpack anything that you think that the audience might benefit from.
Oh, so many questions. How did you rediscover yourself in going through this period of burnout? What was involved in that? Because I think it's something most of us experience at some point or another, and nobody tells us how to navigate these things.
Yeah, so first, even knowing what burnout was a huge thing. So the work environment that I was in, it happened in the work environment. And often when we Google what burnout is, it comes up as work-related stress. And for a large part, yes, it was, because I was in a job that was go, go, go all the time. But as a social worker, I understand that context, as again, is really important. So it wasn't just that. I was studying a master's degree. I had 2 kids. I had my long history of mental health. And so all these things impact. And essentially, I'd become very cynical. I'd be so tired and exhausted of trying to fight fights that, I thought were really important, but nobody else thought were really important. So, for example, trying to go into work and change systems or change policies or procedures in a way that I felt would be better serving our clients. But, upper levels of management just didn't want that. They just wanted me to do what they said and just go, go, go. And so I tried to do that for about 2 to 4 years, and it was just exhausting. But also things like lost joy in my life and lost this creative spirit that I was growing up. I remember growing up in high school and younger years, and being creative was really important to me. So doing art and mucking around, being that happy-go-lucky kid, I lost the idea of what pure fun was. I'd become an adult and I was all of a sudden very serious. It would take a lot for me to really enjoy. And I thought drinking brought joy because I could relax and I could laugh and crack a joke and felt like I was in the moment. But all I was doing was numbing everything. And that allowed me to relax. But yeah, so just trying to rediscover essentially who I was. And so the initial, I guess, jump into mindfulness was the usual, practice gratitude, do some meditation, maybe do some journal writing and stuff like that. And I tried it for a week or so, but it just wasn't really fitting me. As a guy, I'm like, these aren't things that I'm naturally able to do. Sit down and write down on a piece of paper how I'm feeling or showing gratitude. I tried the gratitude thing, but every day I almost felt like the same 3 things that I was picking. It was like, I've got a house, I've got a family, and I'm working on my mental health, and essentially, or I've got a job. So they'd kind of rotate between those 3 or 4. And it just wasn't working for me. But what I did then was go back to the therapist and say, this is not working for me. What's some other options that we've got? And then I kind of came up with my own way to rediscover myself. And it was, I would go for a walk every day as part of my trying to be well, trying to get fit again, increase my exercise. And I just started really tuning into my environment and being really present as possible, because that was really important to me, because I almost had stopped being present in the world. My kids would be asking me questions, my wife would be asking me questions, things would be happening at work, and I was kind of like, my body was there, but my mind was on another planet. So on these walks, I'd start tuning into the natural environment. What was the clouds doing? Could I feel wind on my skin? Could I touch a piece of tree as I walked past, or a bush as I walked past it? Could I smell if the people were cutting the grass nearby? Could I smell that smell? And what I started to find was that I was able to really start being present on these walks, and I felt like my brain was in my body all of a sudden. And it felt good. It felt nice to be walking and seeing some beauty in the world, because I kind of lost, noticing the colors in the world, like the big blue skies or the nice green plants in the springtime, for example, or the flowers. I didn't see that anymore. And so rediscovering some of this stuff made me start to feel whole again. I started to put the pieces back together, and then adding on to that, I felt this need to be creative again, and I loved creativity growing up. And so on my computer, there's a computer program called GarageBand, because I'm a Mac guy, and I would just loop music together. I'd never been a DJ or anything like that. I've got a guitar, but I'd never been into mixing music, and I just felt the need to sit down and put music together. And at the end of it, I'd have a song, and I would discover that after that hour of just mucking around on the computer, I realized that I didn't think about anything else. I was really present in that moment again, and it felt good to be present in that moment. And I got a lot of joy out of that, hearing that songs. And so I started publishing them on YouTube, and I think I'm the only person who's ever really listened to them. But it's something that I felt like it was a big achievement. I was achieving again, because when I was burning out, and to the point of burnout, I didn't feel like I was achieving anything. I felt like I was just stuck in second gear. Never can get past second gear, third to fourth, fifth if you've got a really old car that goes into fifth gear. And so these were all things that I was rediscovering about myself. And then part of the recovery process was for me to eventually go back to work. And I did a return to work, which was graduated. So I'd start 1 day a week and then 2 days a week, then so forth. So I was really lucky that I was supported to do that. But I felt this need to share the burnout story to my work colleagues because I knew so many people struggled with stress at work. And so I did a presentation to my team, went for about, I don't know, half an hour, 40 minutes. And then at the end of it, I decided I'm going to just go a bit further past burnout and say, this is really important for me to share because I'm also a guy that has lived with mental health conditions for the majority of his life, for over 3 decades. And so I shared a little bit of OCD stuff and started to educate people on what living with OCD actually is. It's not necessarily that I like things neat and tidy or I like to wash my hands. That's a very small, minuscule part of OCD, which is not part of my OCD. I experience it very differently to that. And I say those things because that's the stereotype of what people think OCD actually is, which is it's not really that. And so sharing that also helped people to understand who I was as a worker, as a fellow colleague, and understanding why I was so pedantic or perfectionist in certain things, or why I got fixated on things. And what I've since learned is that OCD is part of the neurodivergent family. I didn't realize that because when we think of neurodivergence, we only really talk about autism or ADHD, but it's actually, there's a big umbrella term for lots of different conditions. And essentially neurodivergence is your brain just works differently to other people. And it is a spectrum as well. We talk about spectrums in this space. And for some people, it's one thing, and for other people, it's quite different. And so I felt the need to share this and the depression and the anxiety because I wanted to take my mask off, this mask that I'd been wearing since those 80s, 90s and 90s, that I was a tough, strong, suck it up kind of guy, and say, you know what? I am the opposite of that. I'm actually a vulnerable, soft, empathetic guy who is tired of living up to these stereotypes of what we think boys and men need to be. And I'm broken. Burnout broke me, but essentially I've been masking it with things like alcohol, and this is why I haven't been at work. At the time when I finished, I was trying to be a team leader, so I was one of the senior members in our teams at work, and I wanted to really share why I wasn't there. And from there, I got a lot of encouragement and a lot of people saying, Simon, I didn't realize this about you, or thanks for sharing. I've been feeling similar, in burnout space, or maybe I actually know someone with OCD, and we started having these conversations in the workplace, which was really good, about mental health, but also about men's mental health. And so from there, I had more encouragement to start my own Instagram page, which was, it's called Mindful Men now, but it used to be, I tried to make it more of a social work thing, but I've evolved it to Mindful Men. And then I started my own podcast to share the story, so the Mindful Men podcast, and I just loved sharing the story. And then what I found was the more that I shared my story, the more guys particularly would come forward and say, thanks for leading the way. Thanks for sharing your story of who you are, because it's given me some courage to maybe go and talk to my doctor, or maybe talk to my partner and say, I think something's going on. Can we work it out? And that's given me a lot of energy to keep going and going and going and sharing my story, coming on podcasts that are not just my own, just such as this one, to share that story with the hope that there's one guy out there who goes, you know what? I've been bottling it up too, or I've been using the bottle to mask it or to numb it, and I want to live more authentically. What's this mindfulness? What's OCD? What's depression? What's anxiety? What's burnout? And maybe start prompting these conversations in households across the world. Because once we can get the help, and for so long I didn't want the help, but once we do acknowledge that something's going on, we get the help, things do get better. And it takes practice. I've been on this for 11 years now on the therapy journey. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. And I'm experimenting with different modalities as well. So mindfulness, I've been doing breath work the last couple of years, which has been really exciting. Just walking and talking. And so through my journey and knowing what works for me, I've kind of developed my therapy practice, because I'm a therapist now, to tailor it to guys who want to be authentic and so forth. But we take it actually out of the clinic and do all the things that I did, because of what I really enjoyed was not just walking, but also talking to other people as well. And so evolving what it means to be in therapy for guys has also been useful, because guys don't necessarily want to go and sit in a four-wall clinic. They like being mobile. And so we go to the beach, or we go grab a coffee, or we go for a drive or something. We do these everyday things and make it more like two guys hanging out, as opposed to you're in a therapy clinic because you're broken with a mental health condition or something like that. And so these are the reasons and the processes I went through to kind of rediscover me and find hope again and find joy as well. And it's something that I'm continually working on. I haven't figured it out, and I don't think I'll ever figure it out, but certainly with a different mindset than I was, say, before I was 28, and even, into my 30s as well. As a 40-year-old, you can look back at life and realize what's worked, what hasn't worked, and actually where we want to go for the second part of our life, and also, I guess, lead by example with, the fellow guys that I work with or people around the world. But particularly one person who I do a lot of this for is my son. He's 7 years old, and in 1 year's time, he will be that 8-year-old boy that I was when this all started. So I want him to see that his dad can talk about this stuff, and that it's okay to talk about this stuff. And my daughter too, she's coming along, but my son particularly, because my wife often says, Simon, you and Gus are pretty much the same person. And so I want to make sure that he feels okay with not being okay, if that's the case for him.
Presence, I think, is really interesting. I think it's really important. I think it can open the door to creativity, to gratitude, to joy, to so many things. How did you suggest people go about finding presence in their life?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, because we often live our life on autopilot. We might be sitting there and getting our phone out, being distracted by that, and scroll, doing the doom scrolling thing, for example. Or for me, it was, I would be fixated on my computer. And as someone who's trying to start a small business, for example, run a small business, I feel like I've got to do everything. And in fact, I have to do everything because I don't have any employees or anything like that. So I'm constantly focused on a lot of different things. And so many people are. They're focused on a lot of things that really don't matter, like what are they watching on TV or what's happening in the news, all that type of stuff. But the first thing is, I guess, acknowledging that you're doing this, acknowledging that maybe your kids are jumping up and down in front of you, wanting your attention, but you're deflecting and saying, oh, another 5 minutes or another 10 minutes or come back in 15 minutes or whatever, or this is my quiet time. So acknowledging that you're doing something like that is the first step. And it's the same with the mental health story as well. Acknowledging that there's something not quite right is crucial, because if you don't acknowledge it, then you don't accept it and you won't do anything about it. So just noticing how you're showing up in the world. Are you really present? Are you on this podcast with yourself? Am I really actually paying attention to what you're doing and what you're saying as well? You could be in the workplace, and this was where it really started for me, and I noticed it was I'd be in a meeting and the first 10 minutes, I'm the one actually talking for those 10 minutes, but I realized that I didn't actually remember what I said or why we were there and so forth. So burnout had kind of taken my memory away from some of those meetings. And that was like a big red flag for me, going, you know what? I'm not really present. I'm on a different planet right now. Or we're constantly thinking about the past, or we're thinking about the future, and not really just enjoying the moment of where we are now. So just acknowledging that you're doing these things is the first thing. The second part is actually doing something about it. And for me, it was going to therapy. For starters, I was okay with going to therapy and talking about some of the things, getting the strategies I needed. And it started with the journaling and gratitude, but I moved it into that mindfulness, what I call mindfulness on the move. But you can do that at home without even going to therapy. You can kind of just use your 5 senses, like your touch, your sight, sound, smell, your taste, to come back down to earth, really. So for me, it was walking along on my daily walk and brushing my hand along a tree, or taking a couple of leaves off of it that had fallen on the ground, or even the ones that had fallen off the ground, crunching them up in my hands and then smelling in my hand to get that natural smell of like, oh, I'm here. There's living things around me. I can really enjoy this moment. Or coffee, like I love my coffee. So sitting down and actually sipping the coffee, feeling the warmth that goes down into your belly, or smelling it, or you can do it with absolutely anything in your day. Just really kind of putting a big microscope on it and just tuning right into it. It's a great way to come back down to earth and be present, but often we need the coaching or the therapy that goes side by side with that to kind of understand why we're doing this as well. That's why I love going into mindfulness-based therapy processes now, because we can kind of not just do the things, but unpack the why behind why we need to do those types of things.
I think as a society, we're very externally oriented, and that's not where the answers are. The answers are inside of us.
Yeah.
And I think in slowing down and connecting, nature is so powerful for that. When we connect, all of a sudden time slows and we're there. I don't know if you've had that experience, but where time seems to just progress differently if you're truly present.
I remember growing up, and our family wasn't a camping family, but the few times that we did go camping, because back then there was no phones and all distractions from we didn't take a TV or anything like that. So it was literally like you get up with the sun, you spend your day doing active things in nature. You might end the day with a campfire, which is a grounding process in itself. But you go to sleep essentially when the sun goes down. So that's that you're really in tune with that circadian rhythm of what we're naturally built to live by. And so we don't have the blue screens from the phones or TVs or computers or anything like that. I found those kind of situations, going camping, is a way to be just completely fully present in the day, because you're exploring the world, the natural world around you. There might be I remember growing up, I'd go camping and there would be like a river next to us. So we'd go spend time on the river, or we'd go fishing, or go for a bushwalk or something like that, ride a bike, or just play, as kids just play. And those moments when you can take it out of maybe your usual day-to-day environment and go do something like that, like that's fantastic. And now, like the last 6 months, I've been trying to learn to surf. And so going out and surfing, being on the waves, there's nothing else going through your mind other than that amazing wave you just caught, so you want to do it again. Or where am I sitting in the lineup? Is there a wave about to crunch me because I'm not quite sitting right out the back, or I'm sitting too far forward? And so finding something that is not tech orientated, because tech keeps us wired all the time, or it's not overly caffeinated, or drinking too much. But finding those natural things that give us a bit of joy, but can allow us to be really present in the moment. It's powerful. It's the same with breath work. Sitting there for 45 minutes to an hour doing guided breath work, or guided meditation, or guided yoga, or Pilates, whatever it is a great way to slow the mind and then connect the mind and body back again as well. It's not just about doing these things separate. It's actually about living in your body. And I love this quote. I think it's John Kabat-Zinn who references mindfulness as just the art of conscious living. So the art of just being present in your day, being conscious, not on autopilot, but being fully there. It's hard. It takes a lot of practice. Even me as a therapist now, it takes a lot of practice. But even if you can find 5 minutes and then 10 minutes and then 15 minutes of your day where you're fully present, it can start to really fill your cup up again and help us be more positive and grounded and present with the ones that we love.
That's beautiful. How has meditation worked into all this for you?
Yeah, so meditation is something that I do every now and then, like when I'm really struggling. It's something where I used to get a meditate. Actually, I probably should go back to it, but I used to do men's yoga, and then we'd spend the hours stretching. And the reason I did that was because as an Aussie male, I used to play a lot of sports, so my body isn't quite as nimble and flexible as it used to be. So as I get older, like I have a few more things that my body aches a lot, and so yoga was a great way to stretch the body out, but also slow the mind, because it combined breathing in the exercises as well. And then at the end of each of these sessions, we would sit there for 5 minutes. Some guys would fall asleep, but I would be just really tuned in to just slowing the mind, slowing the heart, and just being really present in the moment. So I love that element of it. And then every now and then I might do some meditation at home, particularly when I'm really super stressed or my mind just won't stop, because I used to use alcohol for that, but now I've got to find a different, more healthy way to manage the anxiety or the racing mind. And so I love guided meditations, ones where someone takes you through maybe a body scan, and you can close your eyes and just listen to a calming voice and some calming sounds as well, just so that I can go from head to toe and kind of just take notice of the different body parts or where the tension is in the body, and just relax. And it might be a 15 minute, it might be 5 minute, it might be 10 minute, whatever it is. Nothing too long for me because I've got a busy life. But even that short period is enough to just kind of slow the mind, slow the body, and reset. And then I find waking up from that, having a bit more clarity in the mind. Same with when I do my breath work, having clarity in the mind where you can focus a bit more, or maybe you can recognize that the last few days you haven't been showing up the way that you wanted to show up, or you haven't been present or anything like that. And so it's a really good tool to use just to, I think, reset. And for some people, it's really short, 2 minutes in the car, maybe after they've got home from work and they're about to go into mayhem at home, particularly for anyone who's got young kids. I can completely understand that. But for other people, it could be an hour session or 2 hour session. You can go on meditation retreats. It's just finding what works for you. And for me, I find the sweet spot is, particularly when I'm doing it myself, maybe 10 to 15 minutes, particularly when my mind is just burning at a rate of knots.
I think the thing that I have found about meditation is that it's experiential. You experience peace. You experience things slowing down. You experience greater presence. And experiential things change us. So once you have that experience, now you can contrast a crazed, busy life with this peace. And I think the peace has infinite allure, and that tends to keep you coming back and wanting more of it, or wanting more of it in your daily life.
Absolutely. And that's what I find in surfing at the moment, going out there and just, and there's nothing else to think about other than the surf. Or maybe if the wife and kids are on the beach, oh, did you see that wave that I just caught, or something like that. But we live such busy lives, like it's not necessarily a 9 to 5 life anymore. There's people's side hustles, people working all sorts of weird and wonderful hours just to make ends meet. And so finding, and we're always glued to our phones, it's just never stops. And so finding something where you can find peace and that moment of calmness or clarity is just, these are the things that we should be looking for and doing as part of our everyday, as opposed to waiting until we've burnt out or we've hit that wall and we need help. If we can do it every day or every other day, it can certainly go a long way to preventative actions in our mental health, as opposed to trying to restore a sense of self once everything's fallen down.
If you could summarize in 3 points, things that people can look forward to when they hit that point of just breaking down, burnout, whatever, what are the 3 things they need to do to find life on the other side? Yeah,
so I think the first one's always recognizing that something has happened, and whether it's burnout or trauma or grief or maybe just something hasn't quite worked out, just recognizing that to start with. And the second one is actually being okay to ask for help, reaching out to your support networks, whether that's a family friend, doctor, therapist, whoever it is. A great podcast like this is a way of helping other people, is by hearing other stories to inspire us. So being okay to reach out for help. And then the third one is knowing that it's a continual process. It's never going to be a magic wand approach. So you won't go into therapy like I did when I was 28, thinking that the therapist or the doctor or your friend's going to fix everything and wave a magic wand. You've got to do the work, and you've got to find what works for you, because you might go into a therapy clinic, for example, and speak to a therapist, but just not gel with them. So you're never going to do the homework that they give you because you just don't like them. And so continually just refining that, finding the people that work for you, finding the things that work for you, whether it's breath work, meditation, surfing, therapy, medication, that's also that thing, whether it's getting sober, whatever it is, just find what works for you and keep doing that, because you want to do things that fill your cup up and not really deplete your cup as well.
And life on the other side looks good?
It does, yeah. Often, even when I'm like now struggling, and I had this beautiful moment with a client of mine. We were walking on the beach because I do a lot of walk and talk therapy, and he was in a really dark space, and it was a really cloudy day, but there was a slither of blue coming through those clouds. And I said to him, look up to the sky, what do you see? And he said, dark clouds. And that's all you could focus on. And I said, well, what about that little slither of blue? What does that represent? And he said, you know what? It represents that there's brightness on the other side of this, and we can get through this. I said, yeah, of course it does. Like, behind every cloud is a blue sky. And so we just got to know that once we can get through the challenge or the bump in the road, for example, that's made us fall down, scraped our face, and maybe scraped our knees, we've got blood coming out, or whatever it is, knowing that we can pick ourselves up and we can move on, but we don't have to do it in unhealthy ways like maybe we were brought up with. Like that for me, for a lot of guys, it's the suck it up, days of the 80s, 90s, noughties, and earlier than that. It's before the 80s as well. Knowing that we can dust ourselves off, ask for help, get help, and heal in a way that that matters to us.
Thank you for listening. I hope you'll support this podcast by becoming a Bump 2 subscriber. Buy us a cup of coffee. It's your support that makes this podcast and website possible. I hope you found something in today's podcast that inspires you along your own life's path, because sometimes a bump in the road is actually a portal into a more conscious and meaningful life.